we've talked about it in letters, and we talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on...
Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. This week, we're returning to the Acteurist Oeuvre-View. We're going to be talking about two Setsuko Hara films. First up, Repast by Naruse from 1951, and then Tokyo Story by Ozu, 1953.
So in this episode, we are clearly missing a chunk of Setsuko Hara filmography.
There have been many chunks missing all along, but yes, here we're missing the entire year of 1952. We will treasure the ones that we do have access to, and that starts today with Repast.
This is the first Naruse we're doing. I don't know too much about... Well, I had never heard of Naruse before we were introduced to his films with that Summer in Japan program at TIFF.
When a Woman Ascends the Stairs was the first one we saw.
Yeah, I don't think they did very many, but that's the first one that we went and saw in the theater. I don't even know if we saw any others in the theater.
Not that time, no.
At some point, we made a project of watching a bunch of them at home, not just the Setsuko Hara ones.
That's right. We have seen all the Setsukos before, and there are two more coming up.
So Repast was an adaptation of a novel by...
a novelist that Naruse worked with quite often, or he worked with her texts quite often.
And her short stories. Apparently several went into late chrysanthemums.
Oh yeah, okay.
Fumiko Hayashi.
Yeah, seems like she'd be an interesting author to explore, actually.
Wikipedia said that she specialized in stories about the downtrodden. You do see a little bit of social references in this film that you almost never see in an Ozu film.
They're very different directors, and Naruse, we know, was an actively engaged feminist in a kind of straightforward way. And where...
We do know that? Do we?
Yes.
How do we know that?
Just from what I've read.
Oh, okay. What have you read about Naruse?
That's the main thing. He's a much more politically engaged figure all around.
Yeah, and his films are very interested in women's lives to a much greater extent than Ozu's are. Ozu seems to be more interested in family life in general and often has important male characters, mainly played by, but not exclusively played by Shishuryo.
Naruse very often, from what we've seen anyway, telling stories about female protagonists who are really chafing against the role assigned to them.
Well, true. I mean, the problem that I have with this film, on a first and on a second viewing, is that even though this reading doesn't accord with seeing other films by Naruse or seemingly other texts by this author, it does unfortunately bracket the story in what seems to be housewife propaganda.
Oh, I don't feel like that's the case at all. I think it's saying maybe in a lot of cases there isn't a better option, but I don't know. This woman
does seem to have a better option.
She can't get a job.
What do you mean she can't get a job?
She's in Tokyo and she's thinking about trying to get a job, but she doesn't get one.
No, but is that not by her choice? She has that banker friend who she asked to help her out, and then the whole thing just seems to get dropped as soon as she sees that cat and is reminded of her husband.
Yeah, but I don't think that he wants to help her get a job.
Yeah, but I think that he could if she put a little more pressure on him.
Maybe.
The decision, the changing of heart seems to be her own. We're not shown that she has options as narrow as her friend who ends up selling newspapers.
Sure, but look, it's not ecstatic about where she is at the end of the film. I think it is
they shouldn't be.
About the choice that she makes at the end. I don't feel like anyone could say this is housewife propaganda.
Well, that's exactly what makes it seem like housewife propaganda. The fact that this narrative voiceover is insisting that she's going to find this kind of happiness with
come on.
with this inert lump of a guy.
It's irony.
I don't know.
Yes, definitely.
Well, the character is not aware that it's irony. So it's irony at her expense if it's irony.
Maybe. Yeah, dramatic irony rather than a fully ironic speech by the narrator.
Not character irony.
But I think the film's take on that is quite an ironic one. But we're getting way ahead of ourselves.
Well, I mean, we have to talk about what is the tone of the movie, because that sets the interpretive parameters.
It does.
And obviously there's a lot to disagree with in terms of how to interpret this tone.
I'm sure you could come away from this with a lot of different perspectives on it and a lot of different opinions about the kind of person that made the film.
One thing you can't say is that it successfully sells the idea that she's going to find some kind of bliss in this marriage at the end. Some kind of fulfillment.
Right, so I'm giving the film a lot of credit for knowing that.
So the husband in this case is a fellow we've seen in other Naruse films, who I like to call the Japanese George Brent, because that's what he looks like to me. Ken Uehara.
He does have some George Brent qualities to him.
I mean, mainly it's his appearance, but yeah, he also in this film anyway does have some George Brent-like inert lump qualities.
Well, he's a bit of a charming lump.
Yeah.
Appealing to many different women.
Setsuko Hara's mother at some point says that he's a quiet and placid is basic. It's not the word placid, but that's what he has to recommend him.
Well, she does say, I think you jumped into this way too quickly, but no, I'm okay with this guy. He's fine. You should go back to him. Every morning she wakes up her daughter and says, are you going back to your husband today?
This is a very weird movie.
It is.
And it's got a lot of detail that doesn't insist that you know what it means.
No, that's true.
It's very novelistic in that way.
It's set in a suburb of Osaka.
Oh yeah, and the other thing about Naruse's films is that although they are also mostly domestic dramas, they are set in a Japan and even a Tokyo at one point, so different than Ozu's that they might as well be different planets.
Well, it's an interesting pairing this week.
I mean, you could do that. Obviously, you could do that. When people make New York movies, they only make Manhattan movies, it seems like, and it always looks like the same Manhattan. But you could do this sort of thing in Toronto. You could just pick a different neighborhood and, yeah, you'd be on a different planet.
This week, though, we've got the first film here. There's a tour bus going around Osaka with a lot of people from Tokyo in it.
Yeah.
And in our second film, Tokyo Story, we're going to see a tour bus going around Tokyo with people from all over Japan visiting the metropolis.
It's true.
So we've got two-way internal tourism going on in this week's setup. But yeah, Osaka is the setting of most of the film here, or the first part of it anyway.
And he loves the back lanes of these suburbs as much as Ozu loves the hallways of his houses.
That's true. We're going to see a lot of back lanes in different Naruse films. This couple, though, not newlywed. They've been married for 5 years, I think.
She said 5, yeah.
Yeah. So they lived in Tokyo when they got married, and he got transferred down to Osaka, which is still a very big city, but not quite as exciting as Tokyo.
Is it like where Setsuko Hara is going to go and live at the end of early summer? Is it like that?
No. No, this is a giant city, Osaka.
Oh, okay.
It's just not as gigantic and culturally significant as Tokyo.
But a point is made at the beginning of the movie that they are in the burbs.
Yeah, they're out in the middle of nowhere. So that kind of becomes the same no matter what town you're in, I guess, at this point in the mid-20th century. Suburbs are all starting to seem alike, no matter what country you're in, even. There's just not much to do there.
And she is disappointed in her lot as a wife, not just because she's spending all of her time scrubbing shirts and cooking, but because her husband is an inert lump who pays no attention to her.
It's pretty amazing, right? Because usually this kind of situation, there's a bunch of screaming kids involved too, but no, she is run ragged just taking care of the house and this one guy.
There's not even any, I don't recall even any discussion of children.
No. Well, they clearly can't afford it because they're having trouble getting by without kids.
I mean, that could be part of the problem if there's no sex allowed in this equation. You know what birth control is like in Japan in 1951? I bet it's not great.
We don't know that. It could be very readily available. Not sure.
Well, no pill.
No pill. pill.
No pill for
but
anybody.
Condoms.
You're really taking your chances there. Lots of abortions? I don't know. I don't know what the status is.
They do have a cat.
They do have a cat.
Which is a very important character.
What's the cat's name again?
Yuri.
Yuri, yes.
She's looking for Yuri right at the beginning of the film.
It's a small cat or a kitten.
Yeah, I would think it must be a small cat because...
She calls it a cat.
Yeah. A fair bit of time passes and the cat doesn't grow. A small kitty always climbing up on the roof.
Yep. Weirdness begins when the husband's perky 20-year-old niece shows up for a surprise visit.
Yeah, and just sort of shows up how drab and pathetic their lives are.
And also flirts like hell with her uncle. Even an awkward, almost sexual type scene, although I don't think he knows what's going on.
No, he doesn't.
He is attracted to her, though.
Well, sure.
Undeniably, he is attracted to her, but I don't think he even, is aware of that.
No, he has no intentions for that to happen, for anything to go anywhere, but yes, there is a weird scene where he gets pulled down onto her.
Saved by a nosebleed.
But
there's no denying that Setsuko Hara, Mikio, is jealous, as well as just generally annoyed by this girl.
I mean, it's a whole complex of things. She just resents her freewheeling attitude towards life because it's something that she no longer has any access to.
Yeah, but this girl really is a bit of a jerk.
She's just a thoughtless young girl.
Yeah, she's completely thoughtless.
She's not malevolent or anything.
No, but she's, thoughtless in her criticisms of their drabness. Also in the fact that she just flirts with every man around without giving any, thought to this leading or not leading to anything.
Her criticisms only really hurt, though, because Setsuko Hara has the same feeling about it. She does feel like his ties are pathetic, and it's just emphasized when another woman comes into the house and points it out.
Sure.
She was trying
to
stave off those thoughts.
There's no sense to be made of this scene that does help precipitate her to leave, where she comes home and finds out that he's been taking tea up to his niece, unless there's some weird element of sexual or emotional jealousy.
Yeah, there's emotional jealousy for sure, 100%, because has he ever brought tea to his wife? No, never, clearly.
But you don't worry about a man showing more emotional attention to another woman unless there's an element of sexual jealousy there.
Yeah, there's that. I do think it's more. I think the fact that he pays any attention to the needs of anyone else in the house is enough for her to go ballistic.
Especially if it's a pretty woman. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting because you don't normally have quasi-incestuous triangle introduced into a movie without a big deal being made out of it, basically. And yet, that sort of thing, I'm sure, happens in families all the time.
I don't know, maybe. And she also has a relative that she has feelings for, which is her cousin.
Yeah, but that actually happens. People marry their cousins, they don't marry their uncles. No. Little girls sometimes get crushes on their uncles.
And we do spend quite a lot of time on this developing situation as it builds to that nosebleed that is kind of a climax of the visit.
A climax! Climactic nosebleed.
The aforementioned tour bus trip around Osaka. It's supposed to be the three of them that go, but Setsuko begs off at the last minute when she realizes that she just feels like she has no place when these two are around.
She will be a fifth wheel.
So she stays home and punishes herself with more drudgery instead.
It's very striking seeing this movie in particular together with Tokyo Story, because Naruse and Ozu, although extremely different filmmakers, are more comparable than Kurosawa and Ozu. So this really makes it strikingly obvious how particular her performances in Ozu's films are to those films. She does not play that character that way in any other film.
No, that's true. Now, I mean, here she is brilliantly playing a very dissatisfied woman.
Well, she's pretty damn dissatisfied in Tokyo Story, too.
Yeah,
but it's
totally
still a
different,
totally different character.
Totally different approach. Totally different cosmology.
Yes.
No, here she really has nothing to fall back on. No Setsuko Hara smile even to fall back on.
She smiles quite a lot, but she also frowns quite a lot.
Exactly.
Another precipitating event is, well, there's a couple. There's going out with her girlfriends.
Yeah, her classmates. they've all stayed in touch, the 5, and they've all come from different walks of life, or at least they've all wound up in different walks of life. Some of them are much more prosperous than others. And I guess the best friend of all of them is
the self-described spinster with her glasses.
She has her glasses.
She looks about 25.
They just trade barbs about their respective lots in life. Setsuko Hara feels like this friend has it made because she's got a piano and all kinds of free time. And, of course, I guess the spinster is traditionally supposed to look with awe upon all of her married friends who have achieved this kind of completeness in their life that she hasn't. But she seems to be having a good time, actually. So
yeah, it's true.
It seems to stack the deck against Setsuko Hara, really.
She has a weird phobia of cats, though.
Well, that's a problem, yeah.
I've never seen anyone scream when they see a little cat before.
I've met people like that.
Really?
Yeah. Obviously, they didn't come to my house very much.
And then there's also the husband's drunken night,
where we see some of his acumen come in, right? So he is a fairly lowly employee at a brokerage house. He's got a bunch of guys around him who are get-rich-quick
They're
types.
like Wolf of Wall Street.
They are, yeah. And he is not. I mean, he's in that environment, but he has a much more conservative approach.
Not a wolf.
He gets sort of tricked into spending an entire drunken evening with one friend who he always goes out with from work, and then this other guy who prearranges to run into them so that he can give him the hard sell on a great business opportunity that they need him to bring his firm in on. So he must have some sway at his company, otherwise they wouldn't be bothering. Right, because this guy has no money of his own.
Yeah.
He would have to have influence enough to get the officers of his company to invest in this thing. And no, he refuses. He says this is no go, even after he gets wined and dined for a very long time.
And one of them brings along, if I'm not mistaken, the mistress who lives across the lane from them?
Yes.
Who's notorious for being a mistress? She's not nearly as cute as Setsuko Hara, though.
No, nobody is. And everyone sort of points out that he's
got
a beautiful wife at
He's
home.
paying no attention to her.
We did get some nice setup, and it does recur a few times, the way a morning starts out in their neighborhood. You've got
the kid who falls down on his
Be careful
way to
how you
school.
go, his mother says, and he falls every time anyway. We see some of the other sort of beaten down, lower middle class suburbanites moving about the area, collecting washing and stuff. They have a neighbor who tries...
It reminded me of the Manelli Madame Bovary.
Sure.
Where she's watching the same routine occur in the village every day outside her window.
The neighbor who comes to call upon them in an effort to sell rice because they have no other way to make money. Her husband's out of work again.
A lot of people out of work.
Yes, very, very stark economic conditions at this time in this area of Japan, for sure.
Also in Tokyo,
everywhere.
though, when she goes to Tokyo, that's where she finds her single parent friend.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, the country was destroyed, practically, 5 years before. So, rebuilding. It's not going to happen overnight.
Is this marriage from 5 years before? Is this a metaphor for the disappointing reality of post-war Japan? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there.
Nothing very happy about pre-war Japan either.
Or war Japan.
No, exactly. That mistress, everyone sort of disassociates themselves from her. They don't want to get to know her, but she is a neighbor. It's an open secret, and yeah, we get to see her in her natural environment at the nightclub.
Part 2 happens when Setsuko Hara decides she's going to leave him separate herself from him, maybe permanently leave him. That does seem to be the intention. Go back to Tokyo, but not leave the niece with him, get rid of her at the same time.
That's right.
Chaperone her out of there.
So she goes home. She goes home and stays with her mother and brother and the brother's wife. They have a store in suburban Tokyo, it seems like. There's some interesting dynamics going on there. The mother is Haruko Sugimara.
Who's also in Tokyo Story.
She's in every movie that we see. I think I've seen more of her movies than any other Japanese star.
Probably, yep.
She's pretty great in everything. She plays so many different kinds of roles.
Usually character roles, but sometimes star.
Yeah. Now here, she's just mildly amused and disapproving of her daughter's behavior. She thinks this is a mistake, but she's like, look, if you want to relax here for a while, fine, but you should be thinking about going back to old Ken. We are told later that it really is the brother that puts his foot down and says, no, she can stay here as long as she wants. And that's behind the scenes, because we never
Well, it would have to be, because he's obviously footing the bill for the household.
Yeah, we never see that scene dramatized. It's just referred to that he has done this behind the scenes. So he's an interesting character, the brother.
Yes.
He definitely is really into his wife.
Yes.
So they make a good team.
We saw her in Blue Mountains.
Yes.
Actress's name, Yokosugi.
They've got a good thing going on there, and it's a bit of a strange imposition for Setsuko Hara to just move in there and never leave, but that's what she does. She is intending to get a job.
Yeah, so this is supposed to be temporary. But he's definitely no Stanley Kowalski about it.
No, and it never really develops into anything, as we said earlier.
Well, this is what I was saying. Like, she's talking to this banker who clearly has a romantic interest in her, this cousin. Yeah. Asking him to get her a job. They're having some drinks at a restaurant, and she's feeling very lightheaded, and like there's a weight off her shoulders, and then the issue is dropped, and it is dropped on account of a cat. Yeah, she sees a cat on a roof, and this snaps her back to her life in Osaka. Now, previously, when her girlfriends had asked her about how's her relationship with her husband, one of them asks her, I think it's a spinster, can you talk to him? And her reply is, I have a cat. That's who I talk to, yeah, Yuri. And, of course, the girls are like, oh, great answer. But somehow, at this point, the cat seems to be reminding her of her husband. Yes. Rather than being, like, a substitute for her husband. Well, my relationship with my cat does seem to be fairly similar to her relationship to her husband. You can't talk to me, therefore you have a cat? No, I'm saying the cat, I don't really wind up talking to the cat. I just take care of the cat, snuggle up to the cat, but the cat doesn't talk to me about my problems or do anything. I hear you talk to the cat all the time, though not about your problems. No, exactly. The cat doesn't care about my problems. The cat wants what the cat wants. And if the cat could financially support you, all the better. Yeah, that would be great. But anyway, I can see how the cat and her husband have started to become similar in her mind. Even though back at home, the husband has given away the cat because he can't take care of anything. He does not trust himself to take care of either himself or the cat. Yeah. Presumably, the cat can be returned to them now that she is headed home. It's true, he has sent the cat to board somewhere else. Well, it's a one-parent household. So at this point, as we see all sorts of different women show up at his house, some with designs on him. That's right. We become aware that one of his virtues, like I wasn't too sure what was going on with the niece, but one of his virtues is that he is it's not possible, it doesn't seem possible for him to either conceive of an affair or even fall into one because he is so oblivious. It's a little ambiguous what's going on with the mistress, though. You think? I think it's left open enough that he might have slept with her before that scene. Or he may just really be collecting his laundry. I really don't know. Either way. I read it as she was attempting and he was not picking up on it. But maybe I'm wrong. I wasn't watching that attentively. Because what she's saying to him is that she's going to drop her old sugar daddy, who is one of those guys that was trying to ring him in on the scheme. Yeah, I know she's saying that, but I didn't think that necessarily he'd have to sleep with her before she said that. I wasn't entirely sure whether he already had slept with her the night before, and she's saying, now, let's become a power couple here. No, I have no idea. It's not explicit at all. It could be one or the other. He could have just wandered in to get his laundry, because everyone's doing his laundry for him. Yes, exactly. And that's probably the case. At any rate, he's not, He's not going to get emotionally entangled with another woman, that's for sure. Well, not just that. He's barely emotionally entangled with his wife. Well, yeah, that's the thing, exactly. And he seems to be having a better time with the niece, but only because she is so proactive and kind of like making him do things. And she's a child. Sure. And he is basically just a child that has a stockbroker job and wants to come home and get a meal made by mommy. That's one of her complaints, that as soon as he sees her, he says, I'm starving. Yeah, that's exactly. The only thing he says to her. He's got a Pavlovian response to his wife. Is that why the movie's called Repast? Yeah, I think so. Okay, well, an important moment is when she writes him the letter. Yes.
What was in that letter?
She says some of the things that are in the letter. She starts telling him about how much she misses him. And then she decides to not send this because he hasn't sent her any letters.
Probably would not even register with him if he read it.
Except that he does eventually show up.
But he still isn't listening to her.
But he must want her back.
Yeah, I think he wants her back, and he cares about her as much as he's able to. Becoming a real interlocutor, or even really reading and thinking about what she might have written to him, I don't think that that's in his powers.
No, I mean, absolutely. Like, when she tears up the letter in their final scene together, she's basically renouncing...
making her peace with the fact that
exactly,
that's not the kind of marriage this is going to be.
I'm not going to find my happiness in some kind of meaningful
discourse,
meeting of souls or minds.
No.
With this other person who's snoring or yawning next to me. A couple of other incidents occur with the niece, who is Yukiko Shimazaki.
She says she is rethinking whatever marriage plan she had. We're not sure whether this was some kind of semi-arranged thing or whether she set it all up herself and changed her mind, but whatever the case is, she's run away from Tokyo to hang out with her favorite uncle, maybe get a job in Osaka, and just live the free and easy life.
Shows up again in Tokyo.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. She's always crashing in on Setsuko Hara's house. She's not related to Setsuko Hara, except by marriage.
And this really kind of brings things to a head at the brother's house, because he is annoyed that this flibbertigibbet has showed up out of nowhere and is asking, basically for his mother to serve her.
Yeah, exactly. Again, she becomes a weird echo of what Setsuko Hara is doing.
I guess that's true.
She just amplifies Setsuko Hara's freeloading qualities here.
Until next thing you know, because nothing has progressed with this job or with her husband, the next thing you know, bystanders are telling her that she really needs to think about how much she's imposing on her brother and what she's going to do about that, what her plans are.
Meanwhile, she's also run into her old friend, another old friend who wasn't at the gathering.
The single parent.
Brutal, man. This scene is incredibly
And this
sad.
is another overlap with Tokyo's story, in that this is also a woman who has literally lost her husband in the war. Doesn't know if he's dead or alive. He's probably dead, but anyway, he's gone.
Yeah, well, this has happened in several of the movies we've watched. This was a fairly common story. You have to assume the person is dead, but there was no body ever found.
Her welfare, she tells Setsuko Hara, her welfare is about to be cut, and she has no job prospect.
She has a child, and they're just basically wandering the streets. And they've sold off most of whatever they still had at the end of the war, and now they have no idea what they're going to do.
And that's another precipitating event in Setsuko Hara's decision to return home, is seeing this woman selling the papers and realizing that, gee, I've got it good compared to this.
And they see the two strolling musicians that they say are a couple because they walk the same way.
Yeah, these sorts of street performers, it's, I guess, another traditional form of Japanese culture, but one that I've never seen in an Ozu film.
It's true, and I think we see them in other Naruse movies.
Yeah,
I think it's something
so
that he likes to draw attention to.
And so then there's also the scene with Satoko, the niece's parents, where her father is giving her a lecture, and she seems to be taking it seriously and be sad that she's not living up to his expectations until he wanders away and she gives a big yawn into the camera.
That's right.
Her attitude is unchanged.
I think that that's kind of interesting. Hopefully it's going to work out for her. It's true that she does need to grow up a little bit.
Well, yeah, Mikio is quite annoyed with her, the way she's barged into her brother's home and starts sort of telling people off.
Yeah, well, that was ridiculous.
She definitely has some growing up to do. She's got her sights. Do you really think this banker is going to marry her? This is what she seems to think. He's going to go straight from Mikio to this woman?
It's all left to our imagination. None of that is tied up. I don't think so. Judging by the kind of guy he is, it doesn't seem like this would be the woman he would want to marry, except perhaps because he is so depressed that he's lost his second chance at Setsuko Hara, that he's ready to marry anyone that is willing. But we'll never find out, because there was no sequel made, as far as I know.
Maybe it's in the novel.
Maybe.
And yes, then we get this interestingly ambiguous ending.
After all of that, Setsuko Hara goes home to her mother's place, and they tell her that he's waiting for her. He's come to claim you.
And she still takes off.
She's like, oh boy, I better go think about this. She leaves as quickly as she can, but he's also wandering around the neighborhood, and she runs into him pretty quickly. She tries to walk away from him. This is not the running towards each other climactic scene of State Fair and so many other films that we've discussed. I've never seen a movie like this.
I know it. They go to get something to eat, and
well, he finally catches up to her, and she agrees to go get a beer.
Have a repast.
Yeah.
He tries to share his beer with her, which seems like a gesture that hasn't happened before. That's
right.
A comradely gesture.
She doesn't like it.
She doesn't like it, though.
No. There's nothing they can share.
So he drinks the whole thing. At the end of their little conversation, which I don't remember what they talk about.
Well, he talks about how he has been offered a job at a different firm for more money, and he told them that I can't take it without consulting my wife. And she says, no, that's your business.
Then he announces that he's starving and apologizes for it. So this is the best that she's going to get. She recognizes that he really does like her and values her contributions.
Yeah, he does value her
and
judgment.
he makes no... I mean, I think the most outstanding thing that Japanese George Brandt does here is that he makes no fuss about this time that they've spent apart.
No, he's like,
he makes no issue of it.
I'm the kind of guy that you need to get away from sometimes. I know it's been hard for you. He does say that.
But he's not going to change. He's basically not going to change.
Probably not, no.
She's just learned to appreciate whatever there is to appreciate.
Yeah, they get on the train. She rips up the letter, which she never sent to him, tosses it to the winds out the train window.
But then she tries to tell him.
But he's asleep.
But he's asleep, what she was going to say. And then the voiceover comes over and tells us how this is a woman's happiness. Tells us in a cheerful tone that this is what a woman's happiness is.
So
her poor husband, says the narrator, who's exhausted from working so hard every day to earn their living, she just has to appreciate that.
Yeah. If you take this at face value, I don't know what kind of a cinema goer you are, but you're not like me anyway, because I don't feel like this is supposed to be an unambiguously happy ending for her.
At the same time, there's no big wink to the audience either.
No, which is great.
In the tone.
You don't need that.
It's like Starship Troopers. Actually, there's more of a wink in Starship Troopers.
I think that's a good way to close the Starship Troopers of
domestic
Hallmark
drama.
Domestic reunion movies. All right, Elise. Now it's time to discuss Tokyo Story.
Considered one of the greatest movies of all time, and Ozu's masterpiece, says Wikipedia. I mean, I think Ozu has a few masterpieces.
Yeah, I think it's kind of ridiculous to settle on one Ozu masterpiece.
As if lots of directors have more than one masterpiece. So.
It's a great film, but he made about 10 great movies in this span of time, from 1949 to 1962.
Apparently inspired, not directly at first to Ozu himself, but his screenwriting partner,
Make Way for Tomorrow.
Hogo Noda.
Yeah.
Had seen Make Way for Tomorrow, and he introduced Ozu to it. Leo McCarey's Depression-era movie about redundant elders.
We didn't actually mention this, but Make Way for Tomorrow is discussed at length in Elizabeth Kendall's book.
That's true. She sees it also as an entry point for depression comedy.
Yeah, for McCarey.
Yeah.
She talks about it, like, at least half the Awful Truth chapter is actually on Make Way for Tomorrow.
Depression romantic comedy, that is.
And she does interpret the scenes where the elderly couple have their last big fling on the town in New York City as a kind of mini depression romantic comedy happening there with the elder generation, which is a really bold move on her part, which I did like.
This is an incredibly different movie, though.
I don't think it has too much to do with...
I mean, I guess it did for the screenwriters, but I wouldn't know that.
No.
It's not... I mean, I'm sure people have made interesting intertextual things of them, but you don't need to.
No. But it is...
But that is a great movie, Make Way for Tomorrow. But it has a very particular Hollywood kind of pathos. And this has a very particular Ozu kind of pathos.
It's always interesting, though, to trace out the inception of creative ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been much discussed, this film, much written about. And we'll see what we can contribute to the mix here. It's the last of the Noriko trilogy. We should mention that. It's the last time that Setsuko Hara will play a Noriko for Ozu.
And Noriko is hardly in the movie. That's one thing I didn't remember.
Well,
Crucial scenes, but very much less of her than in the former two Noriko movies.
True, but I still think that it's reasonable for her to be listed as the first star. It is an ensemble piece certainly more than Late Spring.
Yeah, that's not an ensemble piece at all.
No.
2 people. To me, this seems to spring directly out of Early Summer. They're very similar in a lot of ways, and even the older couple is in Early Summer, as we commented.
We did.
But the tone of that movie is overall upbeat for Ozu and comedic. And the tone of this movie is everything that's kind of being held back in Early Summer, and we're told that it's okay, it's acceptable. In this movie, it's not acceptable. This movie has a bite. It has a bitterness.
It does, but it also has some gentle acceptance of a lot of these.
It just tilts slightly more in the direction of non-acceptance. It has the same outlook, what life is, but the attitude toward it is tilted slightly more toward the unacceptable.
Everything comes to a head with the scene right near the end with Setsuko Hara and Kyoko Kagawa, where the younger woman, she's like 18 or 19, the youngest child.
This is one of the most famous movie scenes of all time.
Isn't life disappointing? And Setsuko Hara, again, this is, the apotheosis of the Setsuko Hara smile as she looks into your eyes as you're watching the film.
Noriko smile.
Yeah, and she says, yes, it is. So, if you have to get the bad news about the cosmos being a bleak and uncaring thing, people's inability to live up to our expectations of them, at least it can be delivered by...
Yeah, but to me what's even more important is the scene that follows with Shishu-ryu, where she lets it out.
Yeah.
Her howl of despair, which she does not do in the other two movies.
No, she is fully as disappointed in herself as she is in the world. So she has really lived with this disappointment. That's why she's able to deliver that little bit of wisdom to Kyoko at the end.
Well, it kind of reminds me of, Harold Bloom talking about Dickens' character, and I think it's Esther Summerson talking about the force of repression for this kind of Victorian, virtuous, self-sacrificing heroine, and how a certain writer, or in this case filmmaker, can make you feel the force of hysteria behind it. Let's talk about how we get up to that moment. This one, Wikipedia also quotes Roger Ebert as saying that the camera moves once in this movie and that's a lot for an Ozu movie. We've already seen, if that's actually what he said, because this is Wikipedia, then Ebert is a complete idiot, because we've already seen the camera move quite a bit more than that in the prior two Ozu movies, but it's true that it is very still in this movie.
Yes, there's one tracking shot, outdoor scene, very briefly.
The imagery, we noted in Late Spring that the imagery was traditional Japan, including a Zen garden and a Shinto shrine. But here the imagery is all harsh modernity. The tilt toward the unacceptable is also... Modernity is much more unacceptable in this movie. It is an actual enemy than in the other two films. Or at least I'll say, because Late Spring should be out of this, it's not really a comparable text, but Early Summer is. I feel it's fruitful to talk about Early Summer and Tokyo Story together.
I think so too. I'm trying to decide whether I agree that modernity is depicted in an entirely negative light in this film.
I wouldn't say, you don't have to say entirely, but it is an enemy. I mean, the grandparents come right out and say, and this again is implicit in Early Summer, but they come right out and say, I like my children better than my grandchildren.
Well, sure, but there
is a generational conflict here.
There is, but...
And every scene between the scenes is depicting ugly railroads and electric poles and cables and machinery.
Ozu likes that stuff, though. I think.
What, you think he's a David Lynch?
Yeah, I do, actually. I think that stuff is presented quite beautifully.
I don't know.
Perhaps the crowds on the trains are a problem, but I think that the film is reveling in some of those sites that have cropped up on the landscape, the machines in the garden.
I don't know, all I can say is it's an entirely different set of imagery than Late Spring.
That's true, for sure.
That this movie seems, again, as I said, a little more bitter.
Well, yeah, that for sure.
It starts out, this is like the supreme example of how an Ozu movie is constructed. that we were talking about, in that it starts out as inconsequential as it can possibly be, and then by such subtle increments that they are invisible, turns into mega drama without ever being melodramatic, like cosmic drama.
Right.
By the end, and you can't even see how it happens because it doesn't seem to be changing.
An elderly couple preparing for a big journey to Tokyo to see the bulk of their children who are living in the capital. They live in a small town somewhere pretty far to the south, I would imagine, because it takes like 11 hours to get to Tokyo by train. It's not something you can undertake very often, this journey. And
well,
they
yeah,
haven't.
and it's clear that this is a rare journey and that they don't have any strong connection to their grandchildren, which is heartbreaking for me.
A neighbor stops by and they have a little talk with her, and she will come back at the end. Some very matter-of-fact discussions with her. They do have one daughter still living with them, Kyoko, and she is still in school, I gather. They haven't completely got an empty nest, but all the other kids are out there in the world
If
living
she's still
adult
in
lives.
high school, then this mother was having children very late. Maybe that contributed to her poor health.
Yeah, she would have had to have had a child in her late 40s, yeah. Which is
It
possible.
happened. It
yeah.
happened.
We could enumerate the kids. The eldest son is a doctor. There is the eldest daughter.
No, wait, she's teaching.
Well, it's not clear. She's supervising that class, but I wasn't sure if she's... Maybe she's in teacher's college or something.
Yeah, maybe she's in her early 20s.
Yeah, but still, that would have been
Yes.
a child in mid-40s.
Yeah.
The eldest son is a doctor. The eldest daughter is Haruko Sugimara. She is a beautician. She owns her own place.
And as we've often seen in these Ozu movies, the families are sharing a space.
No, they're not in the same house.
It's also ambiguous.
No, they
space.
don't live in the same house.
But they're always popping by
Yeah, they
each
are.
other's places.
Yeah, but it's not...
They always just like call to each other and, oh, you're in the other room.
They don't live in the same neighborhood
So
because
it's not the early summer setup then.
when they're on the monument looking out upon Tokyo, Setsuko Hara points out where each of the different apartments are, and they're not in the same part of town.
Okay.
But yes, they do spend a lot of time popping in on each other, for sure. And the parents, by a pre-arrangement, were already going to just sort of make the rounds, right? And stay with the two different eldest kids.
Yeah.
But there's really not great accommodations for them at either place, unfortunately. Okay, so we got those two eldest kids. Then the second son is dead. He was killed in the war, and his widow is Setsuko Hara, Noriko.
Well, except that, of course, I had remembered her as a widow, but again, this is a situation where there's no body. And
I mean, it's been 8 years, so he's legally dead. We know that from My Favorite
Sure,
Wife.
but that may contribute to her own difficulty with calling this relationship over.
That's true. There's one other child. He does not live in Tokyo. He lives somewhere on the train line, and they do wind up seeing him much later after they leave Tokyo, but he's not involved in the main events in the capital. So it's really just two of their children and one daughter-in-law. So those are the kids involved in this visit. And then there's the grandchildren, of course, who are classic Ozu children.
Boys and pains in the ass.
Yeah, no sentimentality at all about these kids. They're pretty obnoxious.
It's kind of a reversal of early summer in that the littler one is less obnoxious, only in that he doesn't talk as much.
No, he's pretty bashful.
He doesn't talk at all. But even when the grandmother takes him out for a walk and she tries to engage him in the simplest form of communication, and he just completely ignores her.
My relationship with my grandparents was wonderful. I don't know, these kids are missing out. They're not even trying.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it as I watched them, because I was thinking how much I valued having a close relationship with my grandparents. Now, that was partly because I'm the oldest, and so they were quite young when I was born, and I lived with them for part of my upbringing, so that is why. But even my younger sisters, much younger than I am, they have warm memories of their grandparents, even though we lived like a 5-hour drive away and only went down there during holidays. But we also went down there and spent, months at a time during the summer. And the situations just don't seem to be the same here. It doesn't seem like these grandparents can accommodate taking care of the children or whatever. They're too old, basically.
They're too far away, too.
Yeah, you couldn't even send the children. And these parents couldn't get away and take the children and come back.
No.
The main problem is how busy modern life has made these parents, whether there's a housewife or a working wife. Surely there is some kind of mourning here of the extended family.
Oh, I think so. Well, especially coming on the heels of early summer, where everyone was living in the same house. Now, this family finds themselves in the situation that the family at the end of that film winds up in, where they're all dispersed.
And presumably the reason they're dispersed is that the husbands have to be in certain places for jobs and whatnot.
I guess so, although Haruko Sugimura, her husband has some kind of a business life as well, obviously, but she owns her own establishment, and I guess it would be hard to move that, too.
In that case, she has to be
exactly
in this center for a job.
Yeah, she certainly couldn't run a beauty parlor out in the middle of nowhere where her parents are. There's just not enough demand. Yeah, it's tough. So Setsuko Hara is living on her own. She's been on her own for 8 years since the death of her husband, and she works in an office, and she's made a life for herself at a busy firm.
A life for herself?
Yeah.
You call that a life for herself?
Well, what do you call it?
A job.
She has an apartment. She has friends in her neighborhood.
A tiny little drab apartment.
Yeah, but she is able to call upon...
I don't think she does have a life for herself. However, she does have a good relationship with her neighbor.
A couple of neighbors that she borrows things from. And that hallway is obviously...
With the little trike.
Yeah.
In the foreground. Yeah.
Very famous shots. You see it quite often as she scurries about, gathering together provisions for entertaining.
Ozu loves hallways.
He does.
Even apartments. It doesn't even have to be a house.
No, passages between one place and another. Office hallways, too.
Lots and lots of...
Not in this movie, but in other movies.
Of characteristic shots in this movie. Low-angle shots of doors. Even when they're not going to open or close. He just wants to show you the door, so to speak.
Elderly couple, we should talk about them. Chishu is the dad. Now, he's a very different dad from either of the dads that he played, or the men that he played in the other two Noriko films.
Well, in terms of his relationship to Setsuko Hara, he's gone from father to...
Brother
to father-in-law.
Yeah, and he's just a different kind of guy, too. In Late Spring, he's a professor. He's still kind of engaged with his lifelong pursuits, whatever they are, in his chosen field of academia. In this movie, we're told... It's sort of perfunctorily revealed that he was the head of the school system in his sector of Japan, but it just doesn't feel like he has any connection to any of that, right? He has all these friends who were officials as well. They go and spend some time with the police chief and other government people. So he wasn't just some non-entity. He had a kind of important job. But it just seems like that's all long, long past and forgotten.
Well,
and he's just an old guy sitting in his apartment with his wife.
How would you remain in contact with that?
It hasn't carried forward. It's not the kind of work that carries forward into your retirement, like, let's say, being a professor, right? You could become a professor emeritus, and then you're still doing the same things you always did, except you maybe don't have to teach classes anymore, but you're still researching for a book. So this guy, he has nothing in his life.
No.
Except his wife and his kids. And he's losing his grip on a lot of those things.
Another thing I was thinking about while watching this, do you think this... Okay, it's very clear in the Makari movie, but this is, like Naruse movie, this is a lot more enigmatic, Tokyo Story. Do you think this couple loves each other? And what does that consist of?
It's hard to say, right? I mean, they seem to. They seem to depend on each other, and they like spending time with each other. They talk about things, but not in any great depth.
It's kind of like we were saying with early summer. Within the family, these units form. And these two, whatever they originally thought of each other long ago, whether there was ever any passion or soulmate feelings, or probably not, but they have formed a unit. And that is now the most important unit in their life from all of these years together.
And they've been through a lot, because we are told, we get a lot of his backstory, which is that he was pretty bad drunk for a lot of the time that the kids were growing up.
But the way that comes out is amazing. Just things get more and more and more serious as the movie goes on without you really knowing, because it's all dropped so casually, without you really knowing how it's happening.
But it is an interesting kind of deconstruction of that Chishu paragon of fatherhood that we get. That's where we start out in Late Spring. In that movie, he really is just about the perfect dad.
Well, he plays a drunk a lot in these movies, doesn't he?
This is a trend that we will see in Ozu movies. If we were going to watch all the Ozu movies in a row, as we did a couple of years ago, you would see that people get more and more drunk.
As Ozu gets more and more drunk.
Exactly. By the time you get to an autumn afternoon, I mean, the drinking is really desperate and dire, and it's pretty much constant.
Yeah.
It's an incredible movie as well. In this one, we just get little glimpses of that. And he's a reformed drunkard who falls off the wagon once, anyway, during this visit.
But it brings up some very real wounds for his daughter.
Yeah, Haruko Sugimura is incredible in this movie.
It's very hard to read her character because she keeps alternating between seeming just petty. Petty and ridiculous and seeming like a human being. You know, and even a vulnerable human being.
Well, she's the past master of cutting middle-aged women. Like, there's no one that can play that character as well as she can. The intertextuality really plays in its favor as well, because when she cries at the end of the movie, it's really devastating, because you've seen her in like 50 movies and she never cries. She doesn't get affected by things that way, and is really upsetting when she does break down.
Well, all of the children are affected.
For her, you're used to seeing her, no matter what kind of character she plays. She might even be very sympathetic, but she is not the kind of person that starts crying. And in this movie, she does. But also, she deepens her legend as just a master of sarcastic quips and put-downs. I mean, she's delivering fat jokes at her mother's expense.
Yeah, as soon as her mother shows up, she starts making comments on how fat she's always been and how it embarrassed her.
Oh, it's brutal.
And this is the way we're set up for, this woman's death, basically.
Yeah.
Because people are commenting at the end that her weight contributed to her death.
Oh, God.
And yet this woman, okay, who is this actress? Because she is very lovable. Is she not?
Yeah, well, we've seen her in a bunch of movies now. Chieko Higashiyama. And we've mentioned her a few times because she showed up in a bunch of the Setsuko Hara movies.
She was in The Idiot.
Yeah. And Early Summer.
Yeah. Oh, and in The Life of Oharu, which is Mizoguchi, which we've seen.
We have, but not for this podcast.
Nope. Anyway, yeah, she's very, very just lovable. Shishibuya is pretty lovable too. Whatever this drunken past is, like the daughter knows about it, and you can believe that she knows and that it was traumatic, but we don't ever see him like that.
No, exactly, and that's very skillfully woven in, right? So the audience is
on his side.
They are. It's just like, oh, come on, give him a break.
And yet I feel like at the same time that these are real wounds that are being talked about.
Oh, I think so. If your parents are fall down drunks until you're 20 and then they reform, like, it's too late at that point for you to see them any other way.
Exactly. Tomi also mentions, when they're talking to Noriko about her marriage, mentions the trouble that she had with the father.
Exactly.
Right in front of him.
Yeah.
Oh, you had as much trouble as I did.
They are suspecting that Setsuko Hara's marriage wasn't a bed of roses with their second son, their dearly departed second son, and she doesn't say that they're wrong. She just smiles. She does miss him, though. She never tries to make him into a saint, that's for sure.
The mother obviously loved him a lot, but also does not think of him as a saint.
No.
The one little bit of incestuous family feeling that turns up in this movie is just that moment where the mother says, the English translation was, "It's such a treat for me to sleep in my dead son's bed."
That is a macabre statement. But yeah, she delivers it in such a bubbly way that
can't help but agree. What a treat.
Thank God she got that opportunity. This is the only part of the film that really feels like you can see it Make Way for Tomorrow influence, where the kids are just trying to pass the parents off. And it's not like they get split up, although they do get split up, but that's their own choice at one point later in the film. But nobody really wants them around. They're in the way. Both of them are doing business in their own houses because Koichi is a neighborhood doctor and people call on him there, and he has his office in there. And Haruko Sugimura, well, her beauty shop is downstairs from her house. So it's all kind of connected, and she has a convention of beauticians coming to her house one night, so they can't sleep there that night.
At one point, she refuses to tell, I don't remember if it was her client or if it was...
Yeah, she says they're just friends from the country.
She refuses to own them as her parents.
Yeah, she does. She denies them.
Oh, something.
They're too rustic, I guess. I don't know. She's got a certain clientele that she doesn't want to lose face with them by having such bumpkins for parents. They're trying to get rid of them in any way they can think of without being too overtly rude, so they hit upon the happy notion of sending them to a spa.
And this actually is very clever. It should work because the parents are thrilled to be sent to a spa, another treat that they haven't had before, until they discover what a spa in fact is.
Yeah, it's just a party resort for a bunch of drunken kids.
And they want to get up early in the morning and enjoy a full day of wandering along the water, and instead they're kept up all night long.
Yeah, by the raucous goings-on.
And we get a couple of scenes with the maids singing and talking to each other, even though narratively, like, it has nothing to do with the plot. I just thought that was fun.
So that's a major dud, and they start thinking they want to just go home.
Go home completely.
Yes, they're tired of all of this, and they know that they're not really, that they're just in the way.
Now, this does remind me of what my grandparents were like. I mean, when we went and visited them, then we would all have a very good visit, but sometimes they would come and visit us, and that's just what they were like. Just like after a couple of days, they just wanted to go home. I feel like it's a certain, especially when you're older, you get a certain, just a routine and a comfort, right? And you just want to go back to that.
My grandparents, it was a tradition in the 80s when I was a kid, a wonderful tradition. They would come every summer because they lived in Mississauga, which is out near Toronto, and we lived in Montreal. And they came for about 2 months. I played a series of 1,000 crib games against my grandfather every summer, and I would look forward to it. And my grandmother would also play different card games with us. We'd watch old movies. I would start fights with them about politics. It was great.
I just don't think it's always fun to, especially when there's not enough space, it's just not always fun to try to introduce yourself long-term into somebody else's.
There was just enough room for them to be accommodated at my mom's house. So yeah, it worked. I also took a 6-week trip to Florida with them when I was 8. And that was wonderful.
Oh, I went on all sorts of trips with my grandparents, like every summer. Yeah. Anyway, we were closer. This is quite a digression at this point.
So anyway, we're lecturing the kids and the grandchildren in this movie for not taking proper recognition of the greatness of these grandparents.
But surely there is something in the thematics of the movie, don't you think, about the past being neglected here somehow? That modern life is causing this? Rifts in family are the result of this new way of living.
On the other hand, the grandparents are genuinely in awe of the fact that they are able to see each other at all, living as far apart as they do, and they remark upon that we left last night and now we're here. It's incredible.
Yeah, but in the old days, there wouldn't be... Well, I mean, it depends. Like I said, we've already talked about Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice and how an issue was made of the fact that if you had a marriage that took you even to the next county, you would never see anybody from your home village again.
Yeah, so I guess what modernity does is it makes possible these faint connections that stay alive. And I guess, in our current era, it's even more pronounced. Everyone has each other on Facebook. We can see the photos we're taking of each other every day, but we may not see each other maybe for years. Does that make it better or worse? I don't know. But they do actually name check that aspect of modernity, that transportation makes it possible for them to see each other.
Well, the parents kind of seem in awe of Tokyo as a mecca of modern life.
Well, I love the fact that when they get set up there in their son's house, they're looking out and they're disappointed because they're in a lowly suburb of Tokyo.
They're in an uncool area.
Yeah, they were really hoping to be where the action is, or at least they thought maybe they'd like being where the action is. Now, when they wind up at a resort where there's a lot of action, they didn't like it.
Well, that's the thing. They seem very thrilled by the idea of seeing all of these cool things that they've heard about, but the experience of them is either, momentary, and that's satisfactory. We've done that. Now we've got it off the bucket list. Now we can go home. Or are in fact disappointing.
Yeah.
But as they're discussing their disappointment at the spa, we see them sitting on this concrete bulwark.
Like a seawall.
Yeah. And looking out over this glittering ocean, and I mean, it looks pretty fantastic.
Yeah, well, that's what the resort is known for.
A pretty peak experience, even as they're discussing how this isn't what we thought it was going to be and it's time to go home.
Yeah.
Kind of like the state fair. We've been there, we've had this pinnacle experience, and it's done, and now we're going home. Then there's the whole drunken episode, as we already discussed. But the subject that comes out when all these men get together is how disappointing their children are.
Yeah.
How they're all failures.
One of the guys...
And Shishirio denies it for a long time, but his friend just keeps pushing him, and finally he's like, yeah, my kids are a disappointment too.
I thought he was doing much better. He's just a lowly suburban neighborhood doctor.
I thought this hit something very universal here. For many parents, their own measurement of their life success is how well materially their children have done.
Sure.
And many of us are very disappointing to them.
That's true. That's true. This scene is the kind of scene that, as we mentioned, we will be getting more and more of these in Ozu films. And the police chief, retired police chief, is the guy that will play the gourd in An Autumn Afternoon, the old professor. That's the person who gets the drunkest in an Ozu movie. He is just incoherent almost immediately and gets to act for 20 more minutes in an incoherent fashion.
Is he the one who keeps bothering the barmaid or whatever she is?
Yeah, she's like, get out of here, go home, it's midnight.
He keeps saying she's mean like my wife.
Yep.
The more you remind me of my wife, the more I like you.
That's right.
But he's obviously, he's really harassing her, but he's also obviously completely rendered harmless by his state. He's not a threat. He's just an annoyance.
He's an old, drunken fool, whining about his son. Everyone's, admitting, but yeah, he's the first to admit that the build-up he's been giving to his kids is all a bunch of malarkey. He's not really in charge of anything. He's just a lowly functionary. He has nowhere to go at the end of the night, so both he and Shishirio show up at the beauty parlor and have to be taken care of by Haruko Sugimura, who is not the person that you want to go to for the milk of human kindness. I mean, she kind
of knocks her father's hat off at one point and then puts it back on his head.
She keeps poking him. What's the matter with you?
Father!
It's so good.
Oh, Father, no. Oh, this is terrible.
But you totally understand her reaction. I mean, these guys are disgusting.
Well, this is like the greatest kind of Ozu comedy where it's just so dark.
Yeah. And the husband is like...
Even though the father and the daughter are equally ridiculous in the scene, it's just so dark.
The husband says, we can set them up upstairs. And she's like, forget it. They can't make it up the stairs.
You're gonna go upstairs. I'll get them over here on our beds or somehow.
There is a veil dropped over their recovery period because we don't see Shishirio again until they're at the train station and he's over his headache.
He's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
And he says this was an exception. I'm not going back to the old ways. Don't worry.
Yeah, it doesn't help her at all.
Major trigger was tripped by his behavior. Just brought her right back to experiencing all of that awfulness at her house.
And now I think it's time to discuss Noriko.
Yes. So she becomes the only child who is not a child of theirs who is not a disappointment.
Well, she actually takes an interest in them. These children and these parents are just regular people, basically. Yeah, they are regular flawed people. They are not bad. They are not evil. They are less evil than the children in Makari's movie.
Oh yeah, in Makari's movie, they're definitely, everything is shaded to make you feel even worse about them than you normally would. In this movie, I mean, they're supposed to go out and the Koichi is going to take the kids and the grandparents.
The kids might be evil.
Oh, they're definitely evil.
But, everyone else is just normal.
They're going to downtown Tokyo. They're going to eat lunch at the department store. The kids will love that. And, of course, every kid always did love eating at the department store. I'm sure you did.
Oh, the paddle wheel, the Bay paddle wheel.
Wonderful.
Restaurant.
So that day is spoiled, but not by anything selfish. There's a kid with a really high fever in the doctor's neighborhood, and he has to go help him. That's not something that you can possibly really be mad at him over. And nobody is. They're just disappointed. And as the audience, you're disappointed too. But no, you can't think of him as a villain. There are reasons, and it's all very comprehensible that there just never seems to be a good time. There never seems to be space in anyone's life to do the things that they want to do.
Once they find them. Noriko, on the other hand, is not just a regular person. She's a person who has deep feelings.
She does. And she feels that she owes a tremendous debt to these people who raised her imperfect, now presumed dead husband. And she's always just had affection for them. They must have gotten on well from the start, and they've kept in touch through all these years.
Well, there is a genuine connection affection both ways, probably initiated by Noriko, but it has been reciprocated.
It has. So yes, she takes them on the sightseeing tour that we mentioned at the beginning of this podcast.
And there's a cute little comedy bus sequence where everybody's swaying in time and there's jaunty music playing.
Yep. No one sings in this one, though. In Repast, the tour guide actually sings some classical songs that tie in with the
and she
view.
Has a terrible voice. And,
yeah.
And the uncle and niece make fun of her.
They do. In this one, no, the tour guide is a lot more business-like and just sort of makes announcements the way they normally would. They do seem to really enjoy it. This is what they were expecting from a Tokyo visit. They wanted to see the landmarks and the palaces and the big buildings, and now they've seen them. So Noriko came through for them on that score, and then she invites them back to her apartment.
Her little modest apartment.
Which is a mess. She always apologizes for it being a mess. She does cobble together a nice dinner for them.
Well, with the help of her neighbor.
Well, exactly.
Take these stewed green peppers.
Delicious.
Sounds good.
On rice, some sake. And that's where we first hear the mention of the old drinking problem.
In the first two Noriko movies, we know what she's getting out of the life that she wants to maintain, right? So that she doesn't get married. We know in the first one that she has this special bond with her father, and she can't imagine anything being better than that, and we believe her. And then in the second one, she is integrated and bonded with the whole family, and she doesn't, again, see any point in exchanging that for anything.
She has good friends.
Yeah. In this movie, it is hard to understand. She's at her most enigmatic. It is hard to understand what she is getting out of staying the way she is. And it's also hard to believe by the end of it that she's happy that way. In the other two movies, it's not.
That's true.
Is she just that repressed? Is she just... Why does she have this loyalty to this husband who is dead and who was not a good husband? Why? It's a Isabel Archer $1 million question. We are meant to wonder about this.
Well, we are meant to wonder about it.
It's masochistic.
We can project a lot of things onto her life that we don't see, right? That she is living a rich life of the mind. Or...
Is she?
We don't see any evidence of her reading and writing.
No.
All we see is the apartment and her life at work. She's obviously important at her office.
Oh, people love her, and she loves people. We know that.
They immediately give her the day
off when she wants it. But what is she getting out of not adding to this in some way?
Yeah, it's hard to say.
When she breaks down at the end, she blames herself for not being perfectly devoted within herself to this husband.
Well, she says she often goes days without thinking about him at all.
That's her idea of not being a good person, when she castigates herself for not being as good as others think she is.
Well, see, what I've always thought about this, but it's just an interpretation and you can have a lot of other interpretations, is that she has realized that she likes being single.
But she doesn't ever admit to that. She doesn't ever put that into words.
Well, she sort of does when she explains that she often doesn't think about him at all, and yet she has not taken any steps.
But she doesn't have a lexicon for saying, I prefer to be single.
Yeah, I've been using mourning for him as a shield against having to get involved with anyone else. That's how I've always interpreted it.
And it would make sense if she has been so bitterly disappointed in this marriage that would be true, that she would not want to try it again.
So why not just keep living my little life in Tokyo
but
and going to work?
She is using this devotion as a mask, and other people have bought it. I guess that is what she's saying.
Exactly.
You have bought what I'm selling here, but there's something else going on. But she does talk about this life alone being unbearable, too. There's a cri de coeur there at the end.
Very interesting.
I'm always waiting for... My heart is yearning. I'm always waiting for something to happen. The days pass. It's unbearable. Every day passes the same, and nothing happens. It's a beast in the jungle.
It's an existential situation that maybe she doesn't feel like will be cured by another marriage, right? Something more at the core of existence than that.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Which is why she can say...
Well, she says she's yearning for something, but she clearly doesn't think that marriage is what she's yearning for, but she's not sure what. And being alone like this is unbearable. But yes, it's an existential aloneness that nothing is going to cure.
That's right.
Basically.
But she just
not all of these human connections that she's able to make, and certainly not marriage to another person.
That's the wonderful thing about this character. She has been through all these things, and she has clearly done... That's why I feel like you can, if you want to, project a very rich life of the mind onto her, because she's clearly thought through these issues.
It's a life of the soul, anyway.
Because the way in which she is able to counter Kyoko's own existential wail with such aplomb is evidence that this is something that she has thoroughly hashed out for herself. I feel like it's an irresolvable
Her existential
quandary.
wail about how disappointing people are.
Yeah. Now, the great thing about her, though, of course, is that she's reached this point of existentialist philosophy or stoicism, but certainly she is still deeply empathic, and she does, more than anyone else, know what to do to make other people feel at ease.
Yes.
It's a paradox within her, because most people who attain that sort of level of despair, cosmic despair, wind up just withdrawing. And she has not done that. She has stayed in touch with all of her siblings-in-law. They know her, they see her fairly often, it sounds like. She has these relationships with her neighbors and at the office, and again with the elderly couple. She's the one that knows how to connect with them, especially the mother. Even though a lot of what she talks about with the mother is just trying to disabuse the mother of her wrong ideas. But still, they're able to have a human interaction that is missing in a lot of the other scenes with the actual kids.
Noticing throughout this movie, I kept wondering, is hugging not a thing in Japan, or is it just not a thing in Ozu? Because there's like family meetings that almost never happen, and there's death and mourning, and nobody hugs each other at any point. But the one moment of intimate touching we see in the movie is when she gives the mother a back rub.
Yes.
Again, between two women. Setsuko Hara is not only defined in terms of her relationship by men, even in Ozu movies.
No,
relationships
for sure.
with men, yeah.
No, I mean, her closest relationship in this movie is with the mother, although often what you will come away with in this movie is her final conversation with Chishiryu.
I falsely remembered, based on that she stays with him at the end. I kind of conflated it with Late Spring.
Oh, no. She goes back to the office.
Looking at the watch.
Yep.
The
so
mother's
she
watch.
Gets the keepsake that is offered freely by Chishiryu. Haruko Sugimura insists on taking a bunch of things, which really upsets the youngest daughter, Kyoko, because of this matter-of-fact attitude towards raiding the wardrobe of the dead mother.
I thought that was funny, because when my younger sister died, who was very young, in her 30s, who was the older sister to my other younger sisters, and we all went to her house. We all went to visit her while she was dying of cancer, and then after she died, a few months later, we went back for the memorial service, and we raided her closet, but it was like a bonding ritual, right? Because she loved to give her clothes away to us anyway, and it was a way to feel physically close.
Yeah, of course, and it's just the way the movie presents it, and the sharp tone that Haruko Sugimura
I was just saying what it made me think of.
It could be a very joyful thing to all choose up all the clothes for this person that you loved that is gone. I mean, why not? They would want you to have them.
I still have some items. But no, how do we take all of this? How do we really take Kyoko's kind of adolescent attitude toward it as well? The whole scene of the mother's death is really fascinating in that you see that these busy children who are very economically practical with their time, that they all did have profound feelings for their parents. And this brother in particular, let's talk about this brother.
The brother who gets there late.
Yeah, Keizo. He, first of all, when they stop when the mother is sick on the train on the way home.
Yeah, we meet him briefly. He's back at his office and he tells...
We've never seen him before.
No, he tells his colleague, weird stuff happened. I went down just to say hi to my parents at the train, and my mom was sick and had to get off, and I'm gonna have to put them up at my house tonight.
So they have a whole philosophical conversation there about how you have to make time for your parents while they're alive.
And this guy really never did.
And then, at the funeral, he goes off on his own and, stares at the mountains and starts reflecting guiltily on how he's never made time for them.
And of course, Noriko is the one that notices and comes to talk to him about it.
And at that point, there is this profound, guilt really haunts this movie.
Yeah.
Everybody feels very guilty at different points in a way that kind of reminded me of Tarkovsky's Mir as another parent movie.
Yeah.
Very different kind. But then he's also the guy who decides to take off because he wants to catch a baseball game afterwards. I mean...
Well, everyone's leaving.
Yeah. Well, I remember I heard you burst out in laughter when he said that.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to. He adds that as an afterthought. He's got a report to prepare, and there's that baseball game.
So everybody else just kind of has their emotional experience as they should, and has their feelings of guilt as they should, and then just gets back to normal life. And the practicality of this daughter choosing items that she's coveted or that she could sell or whatever.
I don't think she wants to sell them. I think she just likes them.
All right, well, but she said her mother was really fat, so I don't know how she's going to wear them.
As a keepsake. Again, that character is so great because she has such a complete tearful breakdown. Evidence of really, really deep hurt coming out of that. And you get the sense that, especially because of her feelings about her father, who was a fall-down drunk when she was a girl, she obviously was very close with her mother. And she even mentions when Shishiryu wanders away from the table at one point that she wishes he had died instead of the mother.
No, she said it was easier.
Exactly, but whatever. She says, I know it's terrible for me to say this, but it would have been better if he had died.
Well, for some reason she thinks that they can't handle him or something.
Well,
she doesn't say why.
She didn't have a good experience with him staying at her place even this time, with showing up with the police captain. And she does tell him to, take it easy, don't drink. Obviously she's not convinced that he's not going to go back to those ways now that he's just an old man sitting by himself.
But I think you're right. I think she would have had more pleasure, I guess, in having her mother live with them.
Yeah, she's completely crushed. She has all of these emotional experiences there with herself. I mean, nobody really comforts her. It just happens.
Like I said, no hugging.
But then she still has no social skills, and she goes right back to talking the way she always talks, and it upsets everybody just because of the tone that she uses in choosing out these clothes.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is that I think maybe the movie's view of these characters is more measured than Kyoko's.
Oh, of course it is. And Setsuko Hara says that's just what happens. It's going to happen to me, I'm sure.
But she also does, like you say, deliver that devastating, yes, life is very disappointing with a smile.
Well, that's not the same thing as sitting in judgment upon people, right? Because if everything and everyone is disappointing, then no one is. And that's the perspective that Setsuko Hara takes, I think. Which Kyoko is not ready to take yet because she's still very young and feels like so many things are possible that turns out are probably not possible. Which is that these deep bonds that you have with everyone in your life just persist.
Well, and of course that is also a voice of these three Noriko movies, right? The perspective of the movies, there is this feeling of why do we have to exchange these primary bonds for anything else?
Yeah, exactly.
That is the deep question that they ask.
Yeah.
Even if you happen to make a happy marriage, why do you need to when you already had a family matrix, which may have been more happy or less happy, but at least it was bonded?
Important questions that the movie doesn't necessarily answer, but we experience for 2 hours and 17 minutes a group of people thinking through these problems in a way that obviously has affected everyone that has seen it, or just about everyone who has seen it, to the tune of a number 3 ranking on the greatest films of all time.
And when the mother was dying, despite the fact that I'd felt a lot of affection for that character, I wasn't sad. But by the end of the movie, somehow, not even in any particular one scene, just by the end of it, I was crying.
Yeah, well, it goes far beyond the fate of one person to, as we have said, it becomes a statement, a pronouncement upon the human condition.
Yeah, and how does this Noriko character, who in this movie seems more of a stand-in for the auteur than ever.
Yes.
In that she actually gets to articulate her position.
Because she's a commentator. She is not at the center of any of the plot machinations this time. She is coming from outside the family, really, and observing all of it and delivering the wisest possible statement about what it all means.
Wise, but involved, like deeply involved and emotionally involved, you know?
Yes. As Ozu is with his characters.
As you say, like, the interesting thing about this character is how they have reached this sense of insuperable aloneness that's only somehow deepened their connection to humanity in general, which is an ideal. Like, no human being actually achieves that in real life.
No, but that is how it should be. When you realize that every person is born alone and will die alone, you should have even more sympathy for every single fellow human being on the earth. And still,
sure, because they are so fragile.
Exactly. But it rarely works out that way.
All right, I guess that's us doing Tokyo Story.
There's so much more to be said about it, and of course there are 100 other podcasts about it, so I urge you to listen to all of them.
But that's our take on Noriko.
It is.
But we're going to see a couple of more. Are there a couple of more?
No more Noriko movies, but several more Ozu
Three?
movies. 3 more, I think.
3 more. Some of them all of them great. What
2
am I
more,
saying?
yeah, all of them great. 2 more Naruse movies, especially Sound of the Mountain is maybe my favorite of the Narusas that I've seen. Lots of great Setsuko Hara movies to come.
I like Floating Clouds a lot too, but we're not
that
doing
was great.
that.
Yearning was great. So many of them.
So we had another email from Adam Highfill.
Oh yes, well, he just acknowledged that.
I called him out. With good humor, he acknowledged. Adam, you should write and tell us if you're enjoying Stanley Cavell's Pursuits of Happiness.
Which we will cover on our podcast one day.
My favorite film book. Dave has a few favorite film books, but I only have one.
Elizabeth Kendall, obviously, and Ray Carney's book on Frank Capra is a masterpiece, even though Ray Carney himself is probably not a masterpiece in his dealings with the Cassavetes estate, anyway.
I've got to also recommend George Toll's A House Made of Light film essay collection. George, he also wrote the first critical study of Paul Thomas Anderson. I knew him personally, as I've mentioned before in the podcast, as a youngster, teenager, early 20s, in Winnipeg, and that's how I came to read his essays, but for that reason they were very, very, very influential. But he is a widely well-regarded, interesting film writer.
Cavell has several other interesting books, too, especially Contesting Tears on the melodrama of the unknown woman.
Yeah, it's also a great essay collection.
Yeah. So, next week, Elise.
What's next week, Dave? Back to school. So
September special subject.
Fittingly, because this is going to be a really weird back to school year, we've got a really weird back to school episode.
We'll be talking about Damsels in Distress.
A movie that was despised by critics at the time that I happen to think is perfect, but I've only seen it once.
Yeah, I think it's a great movie.
Has definitely developed a reputation since then, and a movie that has not developed a reputation.
Damsels in Distress, we should mention, is by Whit Stillman. Very odd auteur. He's only made 5 movies, I think.
Yeah, but most of his movies are critically well regarded, and for some utterly mysterious reason, nobody liked this when it was released.
Is that really true?
That is really true.
I liked it.
Well, I mean, critics.
Yeah.
I didn't like his Jane Austen movie, though, but we'll talk about that next time.
It was okay, but no, Damsels in Distress was definitely better.
Whoa, way better and way more ostensible.
Now, paired with Damsels in Distress, which I do think is developing some kind of reputation by now, at least, is a movie that has never developed any sort of reputation whatsoever. Amy Heckerling's Loser from 2000.
Amy Heckerling, known for Clueless.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Other teen movies, but not this one.
This one has never been recuperated.
Well,
but
these are both college movies.
This is a college movie, yeah. So it's starring Jason Biggs and Mina Suvari.
American Pie?
Yeah.
And American Beauty.
She's in American Pie as well.
Is she?
And Greg Kinnear.
I saw it.
And a whole bunch of guys playing date rapists. It's a quite disturbing film. And
well, Damsels in Distress is kind of disturbing too.
Yeah, well, back to school. We're all going to learn something next week, so be here for our September special subject.
Sounds great.